Good. So I said that this afternoon, for our day of recollection, we'd take another biblical character, and this will be St. John, the beloved disciple. And just to think about him and with him, and what does this mean for our priesthood, for diaconate, for being a bishop, for orders, and for Lent. I'm sure I hope you've thought about the beloved disciple before. He's always been in my mind as a priestly icon, for the simple fact that one of my dear friends, some of you know Father Gerard Byrne, who runs the St Luke Institute up in Manchester, for his ordination card he had printed on the front a beautiful icon of the beloved disciple leaning on the heart of Jesus at the Last Supper. So it's an obvious icon for the priest to carry around with him, but just it's really marked in my religious vocational imagination because of Gerard and choosing that and what it meant for him. But it's really come to the fore for me over the last year because of reading a wonderful, extraordinary book that, tell me if some of you have read it or got it, In Sinu Jesu. Have some of you seen this book yet? In Sinu, S-I-N-U, Jesu. I can't remember if it's J or I. Jesu, in the heart of Jesus, in the bosom of Jesus. It's a book, on the cover it's marked an anonymous Benedictine monk. I understand, I don't know much about him, but I think he's American and I think he's part of a Benedictine community in Ireland now. Does anyone know more than me? Anyway, it's a book of the Lord speaking to him in his prayer. So it's a book of private revelations. Of course, some private revelations you would be a bit unsure about, or you would enjoy but not know what to make of them. But honestly, reading this, and I've got no other evidence, it's got such a depth and an integrity and an authenticity that I believe the writer in saying that this is the Lord speaking to him very personally, but leading him in his priesthood in so many ways. It's much more than just a devotional book. It's very theological as well as devotional, and at the heart of all of the meditations, the revelations, not all but many, is the figure of the beloved disciple. The Lord leading this monk, this priest, closer to himself, to the Lord, and to the meaning of priesthood by identifying with the beloved disciple who leant on the heart of Jesus, who was his dearest companion, and going a step further, taking the beloved disciple as an image of someone with a profound Eucharistic devotion, and to renew the priesthood through Eucharistic devotion. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about the book. I'm just saying that's one reason I've been thinking about the beloved disciple over these last few months, of slowly reading that book, which I highly recommend. You can just search it on Amazon, it'll pop up. And just with the Eucharistic Congress coming, of course, it's put the Eucharistic devotion on the map, and I think it's a good reminder for us ordained ministers that it's not just something we're offering to our people, it's a reminder that it is what our life and ministry is all about, meeting the Lord in the Eucharist and being renewed through his Eucharistic love. So just to take, again, like this morning, some passages about the beloved disciple, and to look at them and see how they can help us in our faith and in our priesthood. John chapter 13. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he was speaking. One of his disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So while reclining next to Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" This is the simplest and the most central image of the beloved disciple, isn't it? Him close to the Lord, leaning on his breast, and a reminder to us to stay close to the Lord. Again, what does that mean for you? I'll leave the solitude and the silence to speak to you. What does it mean for you to feel the call to be closer to the Lord? Physically, to be there in the chapel, to be there with your heart, to be there with your mind, to be there in adoration, to have a holy hour that you've wanted to have but hasn't quite worked, the habit of prayer, our Lenten devotions, whatever that phrase means to you, but being with the Lord. Being with the Lord. And given that we are there with him, we can be there with him and be not very there with him, as it were. Being there with him, reaching out with our heart, our mind, our soul. A sense that we are recollected, not that we're always very focused, not that meaning of recollection, but just something with us is aware of God's presence and is wanting to be with him and to turn to him. Let your heart be touched as John let his heart be touched. And to reconnect with the simple things that have helped you in the past. I've been talking about this a little bit this morning, haven't I? Not in a nostalgic way, but just looking back at some of the journey of our priesthood over many years, and not trying to recreate the past or to pretend that we are 10, 20, 30, 40 years younger than we are. We're not. But actually in a simple way, and maybe a courageous way, saying, what are some of the inspirations that have helped me in the past? What is still true for me? And what has been a gift to me in the past that's still meant to be a gift for me in the present? Just as you might have kept retreat diaries and put them in a cupboard, but maybe there's something in them for you 10, 20 years later. Or just simply, what are some of the ways of praying or reading or rejoicing that have helped you in the past and you've got busy and distracted and still might be important for you? What's that bit we get in the Office of Readings? I can't remember which bit of the scriptures it's from. Go to the crossroads and see what path has served you well. Yeah? Jeremiah. Yeah? It's not about looking over our shoulder all the time. It's about being grateful for the blessings that God's given us and seeing actually that many of the blessings of the past are still for today. And many of the things that have helped us can still help us if we reconnect with them. Equally, some of the things we need to let go of and find new things, new ways of God speaking to us. But that we would want to let our hearts be touched, and we, in quite a pragmatic way, we would say, what can help me? Very simple example, spiritual reading. We've all had good experiences of spiritual reading, I hope. A book that's really inspired us, and it might be 2 minutes a day, but it's given us a bit of life and energy. And we've also probably had periods of weeks, months or years when we've hardly read a thing, honestly. And just to say, this is one way, it's just one example from 100, that I know I can be fed heart to heart. Not talking about study now, that's important, that's different. And there will be 100 ways. What are those ways? Well, there's me. I've been reading in Sinu Jesu on and off for about 14 months. It was last Christmas I discovered it. Quite by chance ended up reading Julian of Norwich this January, and really inspired and touched me. And that made me want to go back to a book I read quite a few years ago now, which I'm reading at the moment for my spiritual reading. Do you know Marie-Eugène de l'Enfant Jésus? He's the founder of the Notre-Dame de Vie Carmelite Secular Institute, a wonderful, wonderful holy priest, now beatified. And his magisterial work, I Want to See God. And the second part, I Am a Daughter of the Church. So if you want a synthesis of Carmelite spirituality, bringing together the best bits of Teresa John of the Cross and Thérèse of Lisieux, and really integrating them into a spirituality for today, I highly recommend Marie Eugène of the Child Jesus. And you know the rule for spiritual reading. Yep. First rule is do some every day. Second rule is throw the book away when it is not helping. Yep. That is not true for study. Some study we need to do because we ought to do it, and it's doing us good. The rule for spiritual reading is the minute it stops helping you, throw it away and find something else that will. It's meant to be food and life and light, and not duty, I think. And look, the beloved disciple, we forget this, he's leaning on the breast, but he's talking to Jesus. He's talking to Jesus. Just as Moses talked to the Lord in the burning bush. He brings the question of his heart at that moment. It's all the crisis of the Last Supper and who's going to betray you. But his question, the question of the disciples, in fact, Peter asks him to ask the question. He brings his real question to the Lord. And for us to do that, to pray more transparently, more simply. What is on your heart? Speak it to Jesus. Vocal prayer is the first form of prayer for most of us. It's the prayer we go back to when things are difficult for most of us. It's the simplest, most childlike prayer for most of us. And just when we're stuck, to sit down, to close the door, and to tell Jesus what is on our heart and mind. There's no simpler way. And I think I could say that my most profound spiritual moments really are when I finally got to a point of being able to tell the Lord what I'm actually thinking and feeling. Or when I finally got to the point where I know what I need to tell him, what I'm thinking and feeling. And then the graces that have come from that. There was a sense of going back and reconnecting for me. I talked about my anniversary already, but it was a very concrete thing. So my diaconate anniversary was last summer, 20 years before, July the 13th, 1997, and I'd completely forgotten about it, more or less. And I was at Palazzola, the English College Villa, the English College Villa, where they have their villeggiatura, doing some teaching just in the few days before my anniversary. And in fact, I was leaving, and I was, you shouldn't do this, I had a big suitcase, I was cheating, I was rushing through the chapel with this suitcase, and then a real grace, remembering, caught in my tracks, oh, this is where I was ordained a deacon 20 years ago. I'd just forgotten to think about it anyway. And just stopping with the suitcase in my hand, thinking, wow, a lot happened here on that day with the five of us, including Gerard Byrne and including Paul Mason, Bishop in Kent now, and Jont and Paul Fox. So just happy memories, but just, as I said earlier this morning, to remember the graces that were given, like the tablets that were given to Moses. And it made me want to, you can do these things now, can't you? I downloaded the Rite of Ordination onto my Kindle, took it away on holiday with me, and spent the week reading the prayers of ordination. I hope you do this now and then. And in fact, I was staying with some family friends, and their second son has just started seminary, so he was going off to seminary, and he stood in the chapel and acted as the bishop, and I renewed my ordination vows. So it was a lovely moment when he said to me, do you promise to obey me and my successors? So I'm looking at this 19-year-old thinking, well, yes, I'm very happy to do that, and renewed my vows. So, a sense of renewal. But the real grace there was what I'm talking about. It was those words in the ordination rite. Are you resolved to maintain and deepen a spirit of prayer appropriate to your way of life, and in keeping with what is required of you, to celebrate faithfully the liturgy of the hours for the Church and for the whole world. Remembering that prayer wasn't just a duty, but that it was an invitation and a vocation. And that my prayer, and particularly praying the office, which can feel just like a duty, was a call to pray at the heart of the Church for the needs of the Church and the world. That's what we promised. And I use that phrase carefully. The heart of the Church. John, the beloved disciple, leaning against the heart of the Lord, talking to him, praying with him. There's a profound connection between my intimate friendship with the Lord, as a man, as a child of God, as a brother of the Lord, and praying in this large ecclesial meaning for the needs of the Church and the world, like Moses with his hands out in prayer, like Jesus the high priest interceding for his people at the altar, which we are every day. And it was the connection between the personal and the ecclesial, I think, that was so helpful in renewing the vows and renewing that call to prayer. Okay, being close to the Lord, what does that mean? The second quotation, biblical passage from John chapter 19. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clophas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her into his own home. John, the beloved disciple, at the foot of the cross. Well, in one sense, that's all I need to say for this bit of the meditation. John, the beloved disciple, at the foot of the cross. This is part of priesthood. For us to really believe that to stand at the foot of Christ's cross, to stand at the foot of the cross, the sufferings, the agony of our people, our communities, our church, to stand at the foot of our own cross, our own sufferings, our own difficulties, to really believe that this is part of priesthood, not just an interruption before I get on with the real pastoral work of saving souls, as if that were true, which of course it's not. It's not just about bearing suffering stoically in order to be a good priest. It's not just unavoidable suffering without meaning. To share in the sufferings of Christ, of his people, of his church, of my own broken heart, is part of the priesthood. It's salvific. We are sharing in Christ's high priesthood. His eternal sacrifice is taking place. We're not just applying the fruits of his sacrifice, we are offering his sacrifice eternally, the eternal sacrifice, in an unbloody manner, whenever we celebrate the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And more consciously, this is my invitation to you, more consciously to carry these sufferings and to pray them and I hope, as we learnt as children, to offer them up. We offer them up in our baptismal priesthood. This is what we say to people. I hope we teach them about offering up. But it has a new significance because we are ordained priests. We are offering up our sufferings and the sufferings of the world and the church for the salvation of souls, for the needs of the church and the world. We need hearts, as Pope Francis is often saying, that are capable of being wounded. That's what vulnerable means. Vulnerable means not hurt, actually. Vulnerable means capable of being wounded, with the capacity to be wounded. The shell isn't too thick for the sufferings of others, or my own sufferings, to be hidden. I'm not... the danger for all of us, and for priests especially, of being over-defended, over-protected. That my heart can feel, and not just feel emotionally, but hold the sufferings and the wounds of those around me, compassionately. This is in the ordination rite. It's hidden, but listen. The bishop says to you, to me, are you resolved to consecrate your life to God for the salvation of his people, and to unite yourself more closely every day to Christ the High Priest, who offered himself for us to the Father as a perfect sacrifice? Offering ourselves with Christ, with our people, with the church. Sometimes it's just about waiting. Sometimes it's just about not giving up and not giving in to despair. Maybe that's all we can do sometimes. But to have... to appreciate the significance, because when something has meaning, it helps us to endure it, actually. Meaningless suffering is one of the hardest crosses, maybe. And in doing this, we're not just offering it up and praying and spiritual sacrifices and benefits, that's all true, but we're giving an assurance to our people that suffering does not have the last word. So our faithfulness in the midst of our suffering and other people's sufferings is one of the greatest gifts we can give. You've all experienced this going into hospitals, yeah? Especially when someone is dying or has just died, and the distressed or the grieving relatives are there, and we all know the impotence of our words in those moments, but we all sense that there's something important about being there, and being there as a person of hope with Christ, with his people, and the assurance that gives. A lovely passage, John 20. I'm just going through John, aren't I, here? That's fine. Peter and the other disciples set out and went towards the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in, saw the linen wrappings lying there, but did not go in. Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb, etc. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and he believed. This is John. Partly, think of the verbs here. John, the beloved disciple, he's not just leaning there against the bosom of Jesus in a slightly static, iconic pose. That's maybe one image, but don't get trapped in that image. John here is searching, running, rushing, seeking, believing. He's seeking him with all his will, like Moses seeking God's glory. And there's a very human curiosity here, isn't there? It's not just spiritual. There's a love for a friend. There's a longing to know what's happened when they've heard from Mary Magdalene that the tomb is empty. My question to you, are you still curious about your faith? Now, curiosity is a vice sometimes, when it leads us away from the good and the truth. As someone said to me when I was doing some studies, make sure that you go hunting deer, not chasing rabbits. You want to get a big thought and a big prize. But on the other hand, curiosity is a good thing. Are you still curious about your faith, about the Lord, and longing to know more, like John was? Are you curious about your people, your parish, your diocese, bishop? What is this place? Who are these people? What does God want for them? What does God want for us? What is it to be a Christian today? What is the world experiencing? What is the gospel? What is the gospel meaning today? To reconnect with our ancient youthful curiosity, but especially in this area, to discover a new midlife or late life curiosity. Because in fact, one of the lovely things is the youth, as I know, they have lots of advantages over the middle-aged and the elderly, but the advantage they don't have is in the area of curiosity. There is a beautiful curiosity that can come up at any age and can surprise us when we experience it. To have interests, basically. Don't be a boring priest. And worse, don't be a bored priest. Yeah? We need to... anything. Just get interested in anything, for goodness sake. And some quotes here. Newman, you know this, the most famous one. To live is to change. And to change often is to become more perfect. Sometimes we don't get the second half of the quotation. To live is to change, and to change often is to become more perfect. Great, you're 40, 50, 60, 70, you've got lots of life behind you, okay, but I'm going to give you some cliches now. Now is a new day, and a new week is ahead, and what does the Lord want of this week? What's He dreaming of for this parish, for this community, for us? What's He saying to me? I've been teasing the students this week. I don't know why it came to mind. I think it came to mind because we're going to Worth Abbey in a week's time for one of our retreats. I'd sit down at lunchtime and I say to this random student, give me a word that I might live. This is what the monks would say to each other in the corridors, isn't it? Give me a word that I might live. Say something to me that will give me life. Newman. Or maybe a bit better in the words of Bob Dylan. He not busy being born is busy dying. He not busy being born is busy dying. There's something youthful about John. He's the apostle without the beard, isn't he? In all the art. There's something youthful and fresh. John is fit. He's fitter than Peter. We talk about, theologically, don't we, about John got to the tomb before Peter. He didn't go in because he was deferring to the Petrine office. Yes, this is one bit of theology. Is it Balthazar? It's whatever. I'm sure it's all true. But also that possibly John deferred to his elder. This older, I'm not saying Peter was old, but John was younger. This older guy, out of breath, got to the tomb. No, please, you go in first. He's deferring to his elder, possibly. John is young and fit. He's the first to believe. He sees with Peter, but John is the first to believe. And for us to reconnect with our own youthful heart, I think that's what John does. Yeah, just to meditate on one or two of these passages, to think about the beloved disciple, to pray to him this afternoon, to pray to him this Lent, and to see him not as this static contemplative. He is a model of contemplation, but to see him in his youthfulness, and to see him as an icon of my youthful heart, meeting the Lord for the first time, believing for the first time, running as if I were 18 again to the empty tomb. Is that what you're like in the morning when you're going into the chapel to pray your morning prayer? Is that what you're like when you go into the sacristy to pray, to prepare for the celebration of the Mass? Are you, John, the beloved disciple, racing to the tomb to meet the risen Jesus? We could be, and to wish we could be, and to pray we can be, to turn this into a prayer of intercession. John 21 verse 4 onwards, just after daybreak, This is the epilogue of John, isn't it? Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus, etc. So they cast the net, I cut out a bit there, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." This, again, is a characteristic of the beloved disciple. That he is the first, and at that moment, the only one who recognises Jesus. Recognises. And I love that word in English, and the meaning of the word recognise, is to recognise. It's to know again. And actually the beauty of, and we've all had the experience of remembering something and seeing the old in the new and the new in the old. This meaning from the past is present. This person that I knew is still here now. Recognition. I don't have the answer for this. Just go and think about this. Why is John the only one to recognise him at the beginning? It's worth meditating on. How come? Is it the sight of Jesus? Does John know him visually better? Does he look in his eyes from the distance of the boat and see the face of the Lord, the loving Lord, because he's been so close to him? And is it his voice? They're 100 metres away or whatever. You can't see very clearly. But does John hear something in this man's voice? For us to be hearing and seeing with a bit more sensitivity, and to have a real desire to hear the voice of the Lord and to see the face of the Lord in all the different encounters. And this is a prayerful practice to take on in the morning, in your morning prayer, consciously to pray, "Lord, help me to see your face in each man and woman, each child, each person that I meet today." And it's a psychological trick as well as a spiritual trick. If we actually say that and pray that, we will. Just as I'm talking about it now and I'm being more conscious of the Lord being present in your gazes, you in me, us in each other, to make it conscious helps us to do it. The face, the voice. Look how often people's voices annoy us and what they say to us, and we're tempted to be bored or angry or whatever, but to think there's some pitch in this voice which is Christ's. There's a range. I don't know, I'm no acoustician or whatever the word. Is there a few octaves or more range, and someone is speaking and the voice is all over the place, but there is a particular range which is Christ's voice speaking through this heart, this person. Can we tune into it? To shift our eyes from what is happening on the surface to what is happening within. Or, as John on the boat, to shift his eyes from the haul of fish to the man on the shore. And can I connect this with Moses? Moses experiences the burning bush when he's with his sheep. John experiences the living Christ when he's hauling the fish in. Pastoral connection for us as secular priests. We're fishing, we're out there in the world. The boat is tipping and turning. The net is tearing. The fish are all over the place. There are many shapes and sizes. That's enough. I won't start on a little riff on the shapes and sizes of the fish, including ourselves. But John is there, but he manages to lift his eyes to the shore to see the Lord. And if he didn't lift his eyes, he wouldn't have seen him. But on the other hand, he might not have seen him if he wasn't doing his fishing. We need both. And a final passage. John 21:24. This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them. And we know that his testimony is true. But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Writing. So John is leaning on the breast, he's standing at the foot of the cross, he's leaning into the tomb, he's racing to meet the risen Lord, he's fishing, he's also writing. Our job, my last point, this day of recollection, is to write. And you can tell where I'm going. I don't mean necessarily physically to write, although you need to write your sermons and whatever else. I mean, our job is to write the testimony, our testimony to Jesus Christ on the blank sheet of paper which is this day and my life and whatever. Like John, we're not just called to experience or to believe or to pray. We're called to communicate, which is John's writing. Never forget that this is part of the gospel and part of his vocation. He is the one who writes his testimony, who testifies. This quote of Paul VI is done to death, but I'll quote it again anyway. Modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he does listen to teachers, it is because they are witnesses. And a little tagline from Catholic Voices of lots of media work: remember, it is about witnessing, not winning. It's about witnessing, not winning. And to acknowledge that for Catholics in general and for us as priests, there's a little bit, maybe, that resists this idea of, oh, I must give personal testimony and witness. Yeah? We're not necessarily charismatic talking about our walk with Jesus or our conversion story. We know rightly that the faith is more than just personal. And in fact, I've given a whole morning's meditation about how our job, our duty, our vocation is to pass on faithfully what has been entrusted to us. This is true. There is an objectivity to this. Okay. But there's also something deeply personal in everything that we do. This is part of what John teaches us. Everything we do must come from deep within us. I don't mean we're conscious of having a spiritual experience every time we preach or say Mass or go and visit the sick or go into the school playground, but that we need to be rooted in the Lord, and that in effect everything we do is giving testimony to our personal love for the Lord and his personal love for us and his personal call to be a priest and to do the things that priests do. We're not just sui generis personal ministers, but we are doing that as ourselves. I am Father Stephen. I'm not Father Generic. Yeah? We are people. We are priests. We are both, thank God. And the people know this. And again, I'm not being superficial, saying it's about telling personal stories in every homily. Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about our faith being personal, our faith being rooted in a living love for the Lord, and that flowing into all that we do and motivating, and a better word, animating all that we do. That we are people of faith and hope and love. Simply. And that those words are not just ecclesial. Oh yes, I'm a minister of the church, I depend on the church's faith and hope and love. That's all true. My ministry is bigger than my day, as in whether I'm having a bad day or a good day. But I'm called to faith and hope and charity. My holiness, hopefully, I'm not saying I'm a saint, but just our call to holiness as priests will influence what we do. It will give meaning and strength and depth to our words. This is part of our Catholic theology. It's very nuanced. Of course we know the validity of the sacraments does not depend on the individual faith or holiness of the minister. Great. But the fruitfulness of the sacraments does. There is a fruitfulness that will be allowed to grow and flourish the more we are united with the Lord. The more we are free to love Him and love our neighbour. The more alive and joyful we are in our faith. And this is true of the sacrament of ordination itself. You see, I'm sure you've said to people, married couples say, that the grace of the sacrament is renewed in them. Yeah, it's not just something that happened 20 years ago. And they can connect with that grace like a wellspring. It's true for us as priests. The grace of ordination springing up within us, renewing others. And it's valid, the sacrament, but the more open we are to the Lord, the more that fountain can flow within us and overflow for others. So yes, speak and love and teach and be a good holy priest even when you don't feel like it. Yeah? Yes. And even if you're full of doubts, teach and preach and love the faith of the church. And even if you're full of struggles and sins, preach and celebrate and love the sacraments for the sake of your people. Even when you're empty and struggling. Yes. But having said all of that, the more we can be open to the Lord, the more fruitful the celebration of the sacraments can be, the more effective and powerful our preaching can be, and the more our simple day-to-day love for our neighbour can touch and help and change them. We are called to holiness, and we're not called to holiness just so we can get to heaven, though that's a big part of it, and not just so we can give glory to God. That's an even bigger part of it. We're called to holiness so that Christ's holiness can touch the lives of the people that we minister to and that we live our faith with. We can become a bit task-orientated or a little bit complacent, and to remember that everything we do is for the Lord and how much it will be changed if we do it with and for Him. So that's my over-interpretation of the word writing. Yeah? Writing, giving witness, testifying. I remember Father Dermot Power, when we were at seminary, saying, be careful of inappropriate self-disclosure. Yeah, we've all probably fallen into that trap, and it's good advice. I'm not saying make sure you have lots of appropriate self-disclosure. I think there is such a thing as appropriate self-disclosure, and you'll know what that means for you. I'm saying that beneath and within everything that we do, we want our love for Christ and His love for us to touch and motivate and animate us. And if we can do that, it will be a blessing for us, and it will be a blessing for our people.